Memories resurface as if they happened just yesterday, moments etched with vivid and unforgettable details. Picture a cozy living room, a sanctuary from the outside world. On one of those rare evenings when the silence was almost palpable, the only sounds were the gentle crackle of logs in the fireplace and the soft rustle of a blanket. After 10 years of marriage, filled with ups and downs, the couple had seemingly found their rhythm. The husband was not just a spouse, but also a best friend, a reliable support in every way. Or at least, that's how it seemed until that moment. The expression on her husband's face that evening struck her to the core. There was no sadness or anger in his gaze, but something else, something unsettling, like ominous clouds foretelling an approaching storm. The silence was broken by a cough that sounded unnaturally loud. "Honey, I've been thinking about something," he said. Each word made her hold her breath, anticipating something unusual. Various scenarios raced through her mind: financial problems, trouble at work, or perhaps a long-awaited surprise, a trip together. But what followed left her in shock. "What would you think about spending time with someone else?" His voice was calm and detached. Unable to believe her ears, she let out a nervous laugh, expecting it to be just a bad joke. But her husband, who had previously shown jealousy even over casual smiles from waiters, was dead serious. "I mean, a date with another man. Just for one night," he said, not breaking eye contact. In that moment, her world seemed to turn upside down. Overwhelmed by shock and disbelief, she tried to find the slightest hint of a prank in his face, but to no avail. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her husband leaned forward, as if about to reveal a great secret. "I've read about it. Some couples do it to spice things up, to bring variety. It can rekindle feelings." He spoke with the conviction of a therapist suggesting an experimental treatment. But all she felt was a mix of shock and betrayal. "Rekindle? Are you bored with me? Do you not need me anymore?" Her husband tried to reassure her, explaining that it wasn't about a lack of attention, but about exploring new avenues together to strengthen their bond. Moreover, he already had someone in mind, Jerome, with whom he trained at the gym. Her indignation grew with every second. "You've already picked someone, David? Are you out of your mind?" Her voice echoed through the room. Her husband's composure was unbearable. He genuinely believed that such an experiment could be beneficial. But how could he think that an absurd idea could improve what they already had? The sleepless night was full of reflection. Her husband's words echoed in her head like a nagging mantra: "Is he really bored with me? Or, even worse, am I bored too, and I just don't realize it?" Suddenly, an uncomfortable curiosity stirred within her. A few days later, just as she had almost convinced herself it was all a bad dream, her husband dropped another bombshell on her: "I invited Jerome for dinner tonight." Her hands trembled, and her cup nearly slipped. "He hasn't had a home-cooked meal since he moved here." "I thought it would be nice." Her husband's casual tone only intensified her dismay. This wasn't just dinner, it was another move in his bizarre game. With Jerome's arrival, the atmosphere in the house became even more surreal. In person, he was even more imposing than she had imagined: tall, self-assured, with a natural charm that filled the room. His warm smile and deep gaze lingered on her a moment longer than they should have. What would happen next? What secrets lay behind this unexpected visit? Could this dinner change everything? The moment he said, "Nice to finally meet you," extending his hand, his voice struck her with its deep, almost hypnotic timbre. The touch of his hand sent a subtle shiver through her, an instant reaction she tried to conceal. To everyone's surprise, dinner passed pleasantly. Jerome proved to be an engaging conversationalist, skilled at keeping the discussion flowing and charming with his sense of humor. He spoke enthusiastically about his work as a fitness trainer, his culinary experiments, and memories of his childhood spent in a small southern town. David, in contrast, remained reserved, observing the scene with the keen attention of a scientist conducting an experiment. When Jerome left, David, with the air of someone who had gotten what they wanted, turned to her and said, "He's a great guy, isn't he?" She crossed her arms, staring intently at him. "Don't even start, David. It was just dinner." In response, David just smiled enigmatically, as if he knew something she hadn't yet dared to admit to herself. "Did you notice how open he is? Don't you think he could help us?" he added. That night became the starting point for something she didn't know how to stop. An invisible triangle formed between them, filled with unspoken words, loaded glances, and tension that threatened to erupt. The unknown frightened her, but at the same time, it sparked her curiosity. After that dinner, subtle but palpable shifts appeared in their relationship. It felt as if something had been unearthed, something that had always been present but hidden beneath the surface. David continued to act as if nothing had happened, yet his lingering gazes and calculated demeanor disturbed her. Jerome's image appeared in her thoughts more and more often. Even when he wasn't around, there was a particular allure about him, a combination of natural charisma and self-assurance that both unnerved and captivated her. He had left an indelible mark, and she couldn't help but notice it. The problem was that he, apparently, understood this too. One morning, as she was making coffee, her phone vibrated on the counter. It was a message from Jerome, simple and seemingly innocent. "Good morning. I hope your day is as wonderful as last night was." She should have ignored it, but her hands reached for the phone on their own. "Thanks. It was a really pleasant evening. You're a great conversationalist," she typed and hit send before she could second-guess herself. There was nothing wrong with that, right? Just polite gratitude. But deep down, she knew that this exchange of pleasantries wasn't so innocent after all. Jerome replied almost instantly, "Easy to say when the company is good." Her heart fluttered anxiously. In his words, in the way he perceived her, there was a hidden danger. For several days, they continued exchanging messages, small snippets of conversation that seemed harmless until they weren't. He asked about her day, praised her musical taste, hinted at their mutual attraction. She knew she should stop, but each message sparked something she couldn't quite grasp, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. David, on the other hand, was in a state of almost unsettling calm. He no longer mentioned his suggestions to try something new, but his actions spoke louder than words. He became more attentive, more caring, as if wanting to prove that he was still there, that he was still the man she married. But at the same time, he kept his distance, as if observing her from afar, waiting for her next move. And then, the invitation came, a message from Jerome, "I'm cooking a new dish tonight. And I immediately thought of you. Would you like to come over and try it?" She stared at her phone screen, her heart pounding like crazy. The invitation was simple, but its significance was immense. "Who is it?" David's voice made her jump. He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her with curiosity. "No one special," she lied, putting her phone aside. However, something in his gaze told her he suspected something. That night, lying beside him, she felt the weight of the situation choking her. Why couldn't she stop? Why did every message from Jerome, every interaction, fill a void she hadn't even known existed? Was this void real, or just a mirage created by circumstances? She turned away, trying to escape her own thoughts, which relentlessly pursued her in the darkness. The next day, she made a decision that felt both bold and desperate. She replied to Jerome, "Let's meet, but not here, not where we can be seen." His reply came immediately, "I know a place. Safe and secluded. Do you trust me?" It was a simple question, but it held immense weight. Trust, that was the very word missing from all of this, wasn't it? Did she trust him? And, most importantly, did she still trust herself? The place Jerome chose was a small cottage outside the city, surrounded by trees that seemed to embrace it, hiding it from the rest of the world. When she arrived, he was already there, standing on the porch, greeting her with a warm, confident smile. Her heart skipped a beat, not just from his presence, but from the realization that she was here, that she had crossed a line that had seemed so clear. "You came," he said, as if his very presence was an acknowledgement, an act of surrender to the inevitable. "I came," she replied, feeling the full weight and significance of those words, as if they were opening a new chapter in her life. As he opened the door, inviting her into the cozy cottage, the warmth of soft light and a quiet melody enveloped her. Jerome approached, offering her a glass of wine. Sometimes we just need a place where we can be ourselves, without any expectations or pressure, he said, offering her the drink. And who do you think I am? She asked, taking the wine and looking intently at him. I think you are far more than you think you are. And I also believe you know it, but are afraid to admit it to yourself. He gave her a disarming and knowing smile, as if he could see right through her. As night fell, their conversation became more relaxed and genuine. He shared his dreams, insecurities, and failures with her, and she, against all expectations, reciprocated. Not only did Jerome emotionally expose her, but she also allowed herself to be seen in a way she hadn't been in years. However, the question remained, what did all of this mean? Was it just a fleeting connection or something deeper and more fateful? What if she fell in love with him? The thought hit her like a punch to the gut, stealing her breath. Jerome noticed her confusion. What's wrong? He asked, tilting his head slightly. Nothing, she lied. But he didn't believe her. You're not very good at hiding your feelings, he remarked. His words made her let out a nervous chuckle. I'm excellent at hiding. At the end of the evening, he walked her to her car. Silence hung between them, but it wasn't awkward. Rather, it was filled with tension and a premonition of something she couldn't define. Taking her hand, he sent an electric current through her. I don't want you to feel any pressure, he whispered. But I want you to know, I'll always be here if you need anything. She didn't know what to say. She just gave a slight wave before getting into her car and driving home. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was in a whirl. At home, David was waiting for her. He had woken up and was sitting on the sofa with a book he clearly wasn't reading. Seeing her, he looked up, and his gaze held a mix of relief and a dark shadow. You took your time, he said, and the simplicity of the phrase disarmed her. David didn't press, he just nodded and returned to his book, as if understanding that some battles are best fought in silence. But as she went up to her room, she couldn't shake one question: how long can I balance on this tightrope? The day after meeting Jerome felt steeped in unspoken words that lingered in every daily gesture. When she came downstairs, she met David's gaze, but he said nothing. There was no need, his silence spoke louder than any words. Is something wrong? She asked, trying to ease the tension. He looked up and, after a pause, replied, I was thinking, maybe we should spend this weekend differently? Just the two of us. It was an innocent suggestion, but laden with hidden meaning. He wanted to rekindle their lost connection, perhaps try to reclaim what seemed to be slipping away from them. But the question caught her off guard: what will be different this time? Their relationship felt like a minefield, where every move could detonate something vital. The moment she mechanically agreed to his suggestion, her phone vibrated on the table. It was Jerome. Again. Something inside her went cold, but she managed to hide it, tucking the phone out of David's sight. Hope you're doing well. Still thinking of you. It was a simple message, but its impact was immense. Have you ever considered how insignificant things can completely alter the course of events? Research shows that 90% of emotional decisions are made impulsively, bypassing rational thought. Jerome's words were like a spark falling into gasoline. They touched something very deep and intuitive within her. The rest of the day, she tried to shake off this feeling, but it was like trying to swim against an invisible current. Every time she picked up her phone to reply to a work message or a friend, Jerome's name hovered before her eyes, tempting her. Desire battled with reason. David, on the other hand, seemed to have adopted a new tactic. He became more attentive and affectionate. He asked about her day and suggested having dinner earlier. What once seemed automatic now sounded like a desperate attempt to reconnect. They were like two strangers trying to get to know each other again, while an invisible presence threatened to invade their space. When Jerome sent another message asking, "Can we see each other again?" she didn't know how to refuse him. Part of her wanted to resist, to close the door before it was too late. But something pulled at her, something she couldn't explain, but it was incredibly strong. Perhaps it was the feeling of being seen, of being needed, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Or perhaps it was simply the temptation of forbidden fruit. Their meeting took place in a secluded corner of the park, where prying eyes couldn't reach. Jerome, waiting on a bench, greeted her with a smile, as if dispelling her doubts. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," he said, his voice full of a serenity that sharply contrasted with the storm raging within her. "I hesitated whether I should do it," she replied, sitting down beside him but maintaining a distance. "And what made you change your mind?" he asked, tilting his head and looking intently into her eyes, as if trying to decipher her hidden motives. She began, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain what she couldn't fully understand herself? Jerome didn't press. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "Sometimes we just need to feel things, without trying to rationalize them." And in those words lay everything. Her feelings for Jerome defied all logical explanation. It was something instinctive, intuitive, a connection that defied all reason, yet was as palpable as the air she breathed. Meanwhile, David, left at home, continued his desperate attempts to restore their former harmony. He suggested a weekend trip out of town, hoping to distract from the problems and reconnect. She agreed, not believing it would solve everything, but also not knowing what else to do. Perhaps in a new environment, away from the daily routine, she would be able to remember what they were like before all this. But even during that trip, Jerome never left her thoughts. Every time David smiled at her, she wondered, did he realize what was happening? Did he feel that a part of her soul already belonged to someone else? And the guilt became an unbearable burden. That night, when David had fallen asleep, she couldn't resist reaching for her phone. There was a new message from Jerome, "Hope you're doing well. Just want you to know, I'm always here, regardless of your decision." He gave her freedom of choice, but at the same time, he let her know he was waiting for her, and this was both a comfort and a heavy burden. David, it seemed, sensed the growing chasm between them. He looked at her with an unspoken longing, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Perhaps he suspected the existence of unresolved issues but didn't know how to begin discussing them. And she couldn't figure out which of them could give her what she truly craved. How often do we ask ourselves, what do I really want? Psychological studies show that most human decisions are influenced not so much by a conscious desire for what is wanted, but by a subconscious fear of loss. She feared losing David, but at the same time, she was afraid to admit to herself what was happening to her. Was it possible to want two completely opposite things at once? One day, David broke the silence. "I see something's going on, and I want you to know, I'm ready to fight for our relationship." His words held genuine hope, but also pain. He understood that something was missing, but he didn't know how to fix it. Upon returning home, she felt even more lost. Messages from Jerome kept coming, and each one seemed like an invitation to something she knew she shouldn't accept but couldn't ignore. David, despite all his attempts to connect, seemed increasingly distant, as if preparing for an inevitable outcome that neither of them wanted to admit. What if I followed my heart? This question haunted her. But the problem was that her heart felt split in two, each part pulling in opposite directions, and she didn't know how long she could endure this internal tension. The resolution of this story didn't come as a grand event or a stunning revelation. Rather, it was a series of small moments that together formed a mosaic of truth. She spent several weeks torn between two realities, the comfort of the familiar and the alluring appeal of the unknown. But, like everything in life, a choice cannot be postponed forever. At some point, you have to face the truth. On one unremarkable morning, David was making coffee in the kitchen as usual, and she sat at the table, lost in thought. The familiar aroma of coffee filled the air, but instead of bringing comfort, it only intensified the weight in her chest. She knew it was time to act. She needed to navigate this emotional labyrinth, even if it meant she would emerge from it a completely different person. David, her voice was quiet, but firm enough to get his attention. He turned to her, a mix of curiosity and apprehension on his face. "Yes?" he asked, setting his coffee cup on the table and crossing his arms, waiting. His gaze, though calm, was full of apprehension. He sensed that something was about to happen. She took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. I can no longer pretend everything is fine. We can't keep living as if nothing is happening when there's so much left unsaid and so much silence between us. He silently let her know he was ready to listen. I know you've noticed, David, that something has changed in our relationship. And you're right. I felt disconnected, as if something was missing. When Jerome came along, he filled that void in a way I hadn't expected. But now I understand that that void was never about him or us. It was within me. A long pause followed, filled with silence. David seemed to be deeply contemplating what he had heard. A range of emotions played across his face, from agonizing pain to a glimmer of understanding. Finally, he broke the silence. Do you still love me? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together. She looked at him, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. I love you, but love alone isn't enough if we can't be honest about our true desires and needs, she replied. David nodded slowly, a mix of hope and sadness in his eyes. And what do you propose? He asked. I want to start afresh, she declared, but I can't do it alone. We need to reconnect, to rediscover who we are as a couple and as individuals. This means leaving behind everything that hinders this process. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere between them. Perhaps it was that they had finally voiced everything that had accumulated, or the realization that both were still ready to fight for their relationship. David hugged her tightly, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. But there was still one unfinished chapter, Jerome. She knew she had to definitively end that relationship, not because Jerome was the problem, but because she needed space to reconnect with herself and with David. She sent Jerome a message asking for one last meeting at the modest cafe where it all seemed to have begun. When he appeared, his welcoming smile was in place, but there was something else in his eyes. Perhaps he sensed this was their last meeting. They settled at a table in the corner, and Jerome spoke first. I have a feeling why you called me, he said calmly, but with a note of resignation in his voice, and I want you to know, I understand completely. Jerome. She began, but he raised a hand, asking her to let him finish. You are an amazing woman, and I will never forget what we had, even if it was just a fleeting infatuation. But I want you to be happy, no matter who you're with. And if that means letting you go, I will. His words were both a relief and a stab to the heart. Thank you, Jerome, for everything. But I need to try and preserve what I have with David, and for that, I need to completely distance myself from you. He simply nodded, and with one last warm smile, he stood up and left. She sat alone for a long time, reflecting on what had happened. Jerome had been a reflection of her own unfulfilled needs and desires. But now it was time to look to the future. At home, David was waiting for her. A warmth in his gaze instilled hope that they still had a chance. They settled together on the sofa and, for the first time in a long time, had a heart-to-heart, without unspoken words, without fears. Sometimes love is a choice, even when that choice isn't easy. A choice for vulnerability. A choice for forgiveness. A choice for fighting. And they decided to do just that, start anew. Step by step, realizing that they weren't perfect, but they would be together.